Hello and welcome to Mundane Heights Radio or the Mundane Heights channel. I am your guest host, Jack Lugo. I host a podcast called Bond and Banter, and I've been a contributor to James Bond Radio. But today we are here to celebrate the release of Mundane Heights. And Chris Wood, who is the writer and the performer of his new album, has invited me to guest host, and I am taking over the Mundane Heights channel. I am your DJ for the day, and I'm here to interview Chris, and we're here to celebrate the release of Mundane Heights and play you some music. Here on WMHC, we're here to introduce Mundane Heights. Let me introduce Chris Wood. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hi, Jack. Nice to be with you. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm trying to get my DJ voice on. Sorry. I just, I had
on point. It's brilliant.
Thank you. I had an awful night of sleep, so I'm doing my best here.
It sounds fantastic.
All right, so WMHC, we're here on Monday on the Mundane Heights channel. For those who are uninitiated, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know we met through the James Bond work that I've done on the certain podcasts, and then we became good friends. Chris, tell us, for anyone who's uninitiated, doesn't know who doesn't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself and who and what inspires you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I live in North Wales, and I've played in a few bands locally, sort of doing covers, and I've got a big sort of love of everything sort of 1960s and 70s. That's where my inspiration lies. So, for ages, I've been saying I wanted to write a record and do something that was different to the covers. It's fun to play in wedding bands and all that kind of stuff, but there is an itch, and sometimes you just want to get that scratched. And for me, that was Mundane Heights. I just felt like I had a story in me, and I wanted to do a record. So that brings us to today. Really, that's Mundane Heights.
Okay, well, can you tell us what is Mundane Heights about, and tell us a little more about what inspired you to tell this particular story in the way that you do it.
Yeah, I mean, we went into, obviously we had the lockdown. So in 2020, we all had to stay at home. And that was kind of the perfect opportunity really to get started. I had seen a film called Lost in Translation. I don't know if you've seen it with Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray.
Bill Murray, yes.
And, in that film, they have a sort of a real deep connection. And without spoiling the film for everybody, at the end of the film, they unfortunately have to part ways. And I just remember watching that. It was literally the day that we went into the lockdown and thinking how hard and how horrible that must be to sort of get a bond with somebody that deep and have to walk away from each other. So that night I wrote a song, which is actually on Mundane Heights, called Without Charlotte. Charlotte obviously being the character in Lost in Translation. And it just made sense to me to, just to sort of write that song about sort of how you're going to deal with sort of leaving somebody. And that's how it started really. So I had that song first, which is strange because obviously it's sort of later in the record that song comes up. But then it was a case of sort of building the rest around it. I knew I wanted to kind of do a schoolboy orientated story. And I've always felt sort of not an outsider, that's the wrong word, but like I've always been into stuff that maybe isn't super cool now. So, like into the Beatles and things like that. So it's always been a bit of a lone ranger in that respect. So I can kind of relate to Bernie in those kind of ways. And it just made sense to write a story about escape and something a bit psychedelic, a bit magical. And that's how sort of Mundane Heights got born, really.
Okay. And then, so you mentioned your main character is Bernie Fletcher. Bernie, he lives in a world where, he's not very happy. He's going to school. He doesn't enjoy the school. And all he wants to do is go back and live in the 1960s. And he gets to do it through this sort of time travel device that you describe in the music. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so basically he lives in 2021, and he sort of in the sort of earlier songs he talks about how there's a bit of bullying going on in school, and he just doesn't feel like he fits in with that. Basically it feels like he's born in the wrong era. Is kind of how I describe him. And he's, yeah, like you said, he obsesses over all things 60s. He's got posters on his walls of musicians. He's read all the books. He's watched all the 60s films. He feel like he sort of really knows the 60s and would love to live there one day. And through unusual circumstances, let's say, his mind places him in 1965, slap bang in the middle of the 60s, where his mind feels he would be happiest, which is unusual because essentially, what I've called it in the album is a deep dive. Yes. So basically, he takes a deep dive and lands in the 1960s. And the people that live in Mundane Heights in the 1960s have seen this happen before. But it's usually for sort of people that are having a bit of a midlife crisis, maybe that are, a bit nostalgic and sort of pining for the glory days a little bit. Maybe like a stressed out office worker or something that's got targets and is thinking, oh God, when I was, 15 in 1965, I was, racing around on my bicycle or whatever. So for a kid from 2021 to land in 1965 is unusual. And that's sort of the center point of the story, really. It's the fact that this lad has landed in 1965. Why is he there? And ultimately, how's he going to get back?
It's a very unique story, and it's sort of an ambitious thing to do, especially this is your first album of original music, so a lot. It's a very involved, very ambitious story. So what made you decide to go this route rather than just doing a collection of songs?
Yeah, do you know what? Like, I'd written a few songs here and there, just sort of over the years, just like one song here and there. And I wanted to do an album for ages. But for some reason, it felt easier to do an album that had a story. I've sort of read a few books and watched documentaries about concept albums and things like that. And you typically do a concept album a little bit into your career. When you're a famous band, you get your Sergeant Pepper halfway through the 10-year. It's things like that. So to start off with it, I suppose, is a bit unusual. But I think really for me to be able to write songs, having the story thread was quite helpful, because it was like, well, I need a song that sort of says that he's unhappy. I need a song that sort of gets him home. I need kind of the love song. I need the filler song. So having all that kind of marked out in a bit of a timeline kind of forced my hand, really, as to what I'd have to write at that particular time, if that makes sense.
It's a challenge, yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and in some ways having the story thread helped a lot.
Cool. So what is your favorite concept album, since you just mentioned
that? Wow. That's going to be a tough one. There was a few that inspired Mundane. There's one called El Dorado by Electric Light Orchestra, which is really good. In fact, I think the kind of story thread of that one is a bit of a dreamer as well, which is unusual. Obviously, you've got The Wall, which I've sort of fallen in love with very recently. Actually, in fact, post Mundane Heights coming out, really, I've got into The Wall. But there's loads. A Goodbye Albert Road, to an extent, maybe could be classed as a concept album.
Yeah.
I love the songs on that one. In fact, I'd say Goodbye Albert Road is my favorite song of all time as well. So yeah, I'd say those three. But there was loads of kind of sort of 1970s albums, really, is what's kind of informed Mundane and kind of inspired me. Albums like Breakfast in America and sort of albums like that have a kind of a very human story to them. That's kind of what I gravitate towards, really.
Cool. All right. So we are going to get right into some music and play some tracks for you. So we're going to go kind of select a few tracks from Mundane Heights to play. And Chris also has an exclusive live performance of one of the tracks. So we're going to get to that later. But right now we're going to start with the song Yesteryear, which is the song song that starts the album and sort of kicks things off. It sets the stage. Do you have anything to say about this song, Chris, before we play it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the first song that obviously starts the record, but it's also the last one that was written. So I wrote it on Boxing Day, sat at the kitchen table, and we had originally the album was going to start in the school, but I just felt we needed a track that kind of set the scene a little bit and told us why Bernie maybe is a bit of an introvert. And really, I think it sums it up in the first line. In fact, the first two words are "I dream." So this song just sort of tells us that Bernie's a dreamer and he would like to escape his current scenario.
All right, so I'm going to try to do my best to do my DJ voice and sort of talk up the tune. But definitely, if you're watching this or listening to this, go and listen to the album. You won't hear my voice talking it up. It's some really good music, but I'm going to treat this like we're on the radio. So all right, so here is the opening track of Mundane Heights, Yesteryear. You're listening to WMHC, and this is the song that sort of sets the stage for Chris Wood's new album, Mundane Heights.
I dream to live in the yesteryear. It seems to be so inviting. I let my stream consciousness go there anytime it wants to go there. In days gone by, music had meaning, words were true, had hope and had feeling. I spin those tunes up in my room and I dream of ways to get to be there. I dream to leave the life I'm in and live in technicolor. Can peace and love from years before heal my head and offer more than this?
That was just Yesteryear, the opening track to Mundane Heights. I think I actually hit the post on that. That's the DJ term for like when you talk up a song and you stop at the right point right before the lyrics kick in. It's called hitting the post, and I think I actually pulled it off.
I definitely hit the post.
Although I forgot to I left out the common DJ use phrase. Almost every DJ here, if you listen to the radio, like they'll say like, "Oh, coming at you," they'll start with and you're listening to the radio. It's like, what's coming at me? So I'll try to see if I could do a few coming at yous as we go along.
Coming at you.
It's a terrific song, Chris. And it sort of, and it like you said, it definitely sets this, gives us the setting of the story, but also establishes Bernie as a dreamer. How much of Bernie is you?
I think there's a lot of me that's Bernie. I was quite lucky that I had a great family life. I was never sort of bullied in school or anything like that. So some of that's kind of made up. But I think the part the sort of the most Bernie in me is the music thing. It's the fact that I really, really cannot relate at all with music that comes out now. I literally cannot slot into it one bit. If it's on the radio, it just sounds the same to me. I think it's a shame, to be completely honest. And this isn't putting down all new music. Essentially, this is new music, isn't it? Yeah. But I mean, sort of, modern pop music, there's a formula. And unfortunately, I think it's pretty much, if you don't fit that formula, you're not going to get the radio play. You're not going to get heard. And I think that's a shame, really.
Yeah, I was telling you the other day when we were talking, when I was younger, grunge was something, you know, that the cool kids were into. And I didn't come to appreciate grunge until later. I wasn't really, when my schoolmates were listening to Nirvana, I was just discovering the Beatles and the Stones. So like while everyone was listening to Nevermind, I was listening to like Exile on Main Street and stuff, and I was isn't that cool? And everyone would just be like, that was decades ago, like this is what's cool now. But I came to appreciate Nirvana and all those bands later on, but not when they were at their height.
The thing is, there'll be some kid now that's cannot relate to pop music that's discovering Nevermind. Do you know what I mean? So
exactly.
That's happening now. It's all relative. Yeah,
exactly. So let's go to the next track we're going to play is called Mundane School. Now, you mentioned how Bernie is sort of not happy in school. He's kind of facing a war on different fronts. You mentioned the bullies, but also the headmaster is not a very understanding educator.
No,
as you've established. So let's play the track and then we'll talk about because I obviously I'm an American, you're a Brit, and our school experiences are very different. So let's play the track and then we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, so here we go. Here's Mundane School from the Mundane Heights album.
Happy new term, are you ready to learn? 'Cause we've been frothing at the mouth all summer to worm in your heads. You're our little balls of Play-Doh, and you can speak, but only when we say so. Can you pick up the thread? Now for a message from the headmaster on the intercom.
Class, I hope your summer went fast. We've altered the curriculum, we're gonna break you down to mere shells just to build you back up again. It'll be a long journey of self-discovery, with little of you left to identify your previous selves. Mere memories, shadows on the wall of words that once existed but meant nothing at all. You'll be pillars of society by the time that we are through, with no shades of personality, variety or you. Cloned would be the best description of our approved of blood bowl mission, and if you push against this system, you'll find out the hard way. Listen!
I don't wanna freeze my tits off, kicking a ball in the bleak midwinter, wearing nothing at all. Don't wanna join a team of hairy-chested teens, choking on Lynx Africa and deep heat cream. Don't wanna join a show where the popular go, sing songs from summer holiday, a hellish happy matinee with jazz hands. No, don't wanna spoil the show, but I thought you should know that I don't wanna go to Mundane School. It's the lowest of the low. Mundane School. No, I don't wanna go to Mundane School. It's comparable to stubbing your toe. It's Mundane School. It's Mundane School, where life is cruel. At Mundane School,
It's the finest institution.
but you're hell-bent on mind pollution. Mundane School. Can someone tell the PE teachers it's not fine to smack our peaches? Mundane School. No, I won't cave stand to attention.
Won't you look brave, sat in detention?
Mundane School. And if anything, I'd say I'd rather be in prison. It would bring me less misery than Mundane School. It's Mundane School, where life is cruel. At Mundane School.
All right. right, so that was just Mundane School. So yeah, let's talk about that, Chris, for a minute. Was that really what your school experience was like back when you were younger?
There are definitely some truths in that one, especially like the PE teacher and the Lynx Africa. Do you have Lynx in America?
No, I'm not aware. I was going to ask about that because I don't know what Lynx Africa is.
Okay. So like Lynx Africa is a really sort of common like deodorant, not quite an antiperspirant, but like a deodorant that we have here. And when you were, I think to be honest, every generation of school kid that's in PE has had a can of Lynx Africa in their bag. And basically what happened was if you were sort of getting changed in the changing rooms in high school, you'd have kind of 50% of the air taken up by BO, and then you'd have half of the air was taken up by Lynx Africa that was kind of masking the BO. And then obviously pulled hamstrings, all that kind of stuff. They'd be like, do you have deep heat? Is that something you have in America?
I'm not familiar with that either.
No. It's like a cream that you kind of rub on your muscles to kind of warm them up. If you
it's kind of like an icy hot.
Icy hot. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. It's a similar thing. So like the air would kind of smell of that. And I think to be honest, I think this is probably the most me. When you asked earlier about, is there any Bernie in you? This one is absolutely me in every single way. I absolutely despised PE. I did everything I could to get out of doing PE. My parents, to be fair, would write letters to get me out of doing sports days.
Did the PE teachers actually smack your peaches?
Well, do you know what? I won't land anyone in it, but if you want to sort of give me a message, I'll elaborate on it. But essentially, yeah, it was pretty awful. If you went into PE, then it wasn't exactly a fun time. You'd literally run from one end of the changing room to the other with people sort of trying to, whack your balls with a towel. It was all the standard things you'd expect from PE, essentially. But that one, I like that song because it's almost like a mini rock opera in itself. That song, you start off with the teacher that's kind of welcoming into the new term. You get the headmaster who's sort of like the Darth Vader kind of sort of menacing character. And then you get Bernie's outburst where he's like, I don't want to freeze my tits off kicking a ball. It doesn't suit me. This isn't me. Even like down to things like in our school, I kind of felt like there was kind of zones that you would sort of slot in our school. And there was two big standout kind of groups. You were either sporty and you did the football, the rugby or whatever, or you were like an amateur dramatics, that kind of theatre side, and you'd be in the theatre group. And they were the two sort of overpowering groups within our school at the time I was there. And I think if you fit into one of those, then you were great. It was plain sailing. But there were a lot of people that didn't sort of slot into one of those categories, and that was me. I think that's when you hear Mundane School, I think it is a very cynical song, but at the same time, it makes me smile because I think when I listen to the Bernie sections in that, I think that is me. It's come from me. It is me. That's how I feel about school.
Yeah, I mentioned to you earlier how you mentioned Pink Floyd's The Wall, and obviously there's the very famous song Another Brick on the Wall, and they're the associated kind of visuals that came with that song, and so much time has passed since that album was released that you would think they would have figured out how not to make high school and PE absolute torture. But I mean, to be fair, I had a decent experience here in school. Like PE was not, absolutely, it wasn't terrible for me. But there were times I was not happy. Either. So I could totally relate. But you would think that they would have figured this out by now to actually give kids a more pleasant experience. But
maybe they have. I've been out of school now sort of half my life, so it's probably changed, and it's not to say that school was horrendous. It's just I just didn't feel like it was my place. At dinner time you could choose to sort of stick around and eat your dinner at school, or if you lived close enough with a bit of permission and a letter, you could go home and you could have your dinner at home. And I did that every day that I could in school. I would go home, have a bit of a respite at home and think, just get away
so
from it.
you wouldn't go to like the cafeteria. Well, here, I don't know if they call it something different there, but
exactly. Most people did. I didn't. No, I never stuck around at dinner time. If I could get any time that I could get out of school, I got out of school. Basically, yeah. I don't sort of look back at it fondly at all.
All right. Well, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. So now let's go to the next pair of songs. Now we're going to give you a little bit of a twofer here. We're going to go to a song called "Where Do You Go," which is a song where Bernie's mother is essentially, concerned about him. She's not sure what's going on with him, and because he's kind of like in a daze. I mean, I guess I would compare it. I don't know if this is right or not, but I would compare it to what happens with Tommy in the Who, kind of rock opera, where he's kind of like, he's so focused on where he wants to be that he's kind of like almost in a coma, not in a coma, but he's not very much in the present.
Definitely, yeah.
So this is her singing, and then it goes into a song called "Take a Look," which is Bernie, singing about what's going on around him. And I'm guessing that this is a song that's sort of going on in his head. He's not like out in the world singing this song for everyone to hear. This is what he internalizes everything. All right, so let's play. So this is "Where Do You Go," followed by "Take a Look." So let me start that, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, so you're listening to WMHC, the Mundane Heights channel, and this is a new track from the Mundane Heights album called "Where Do You Go," and it's going to be followed by "Take a Look." It's WMHC.
If you never turn around, where do you go? When you sit and stare, what's it like in there? And do you take me there with you? A mother's love knows endless bounds and will follow you around. So when you're right back on the ground, will you talk? Will you open up? It's not normal for a boy your age to be this hung up on music from the past. You'll never fit into your class with these posters on your walls of Ringo, George, John and Paul. They should be singers from today. You'll make more friends that you can play with. I can feel the parents stare. You never let me cut your hair. This ridiculous obsession needs to stop. It needs repression. It's preventing your progression. It's a phase. This daft expression needs to stop.
Don't blame yourself, Miss Fletcher. One always slips through the net. Not all can achieve A-star credentials. Some just don't have the potential.
Take a look at the guy with the black eye for me. You know he don't deserve it. He was only trying to show us some charm. It caused him harm. Take a look at the girl with the broken arm, left feeling like a poor hunted fox, 'cause they don't know how we're feeling when we're crawling under rocks or screaming from the stocks. Take a look at the scared and the snared now for me. Scared to turn around, the weak and defenseless, pinned down by the strong and the senseless. Take a look at the fear in our eyes. It's lies when we're saying that we're feeling alright, 'cause we can't show that we're feeling Gotta try and be a lad, take a love and make us feel like we don't belong. And we know that's wrong, but we let them anyway. Just to try and make it through another day.
Nice. I love those harmonies at the end. It's
thanks.
very, very Beatlesque. You know.
Yeah, I think it was directly ripped from A Little Help from Our Friends. I think that's kind of that's where we pulled that one from.
Yeah. Oh wow. So yeah, no, it definitely. And then the singer who plays the mother. I don't know if you want to talk about her for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, so Rosie is Bernie's mum in this, and Rosie Cookson, and just absolutely beautiful performance. Really, really heartfelt. And what was like interesting about it was Rosie was actually like a performer when we were back at school. I know Rosie from school. And she was like singing back then, but hadn't performed for ages. So anyway, when we kind of touched base again and became friends again, I said to Rosie, "Oh, would you consider recording on this and singing?" And she's a little bit dubious, like, "Oh, I don't know, whether I could do it." But soon the confidence came, and I just think her performance is beautiful. It's really, really human, and I think what's cool about it is kind of she does a thing where, she starts out concerned, doesn't she? And she's like, where do you go? I really want to know where you go. And it sounds so desperate because she's almost sort of saying, when you do go in your daydreams, am I still there? Do you take me there with you? Do you love me so much that, even when your mind's somewhere else, I'm still there. So I like that desperation. And then I like towards the end, obviously, when she's sort of going on her little sort of rant. I like the fact that it sort of gets a little bit agitated, but all from a place of love. But it's still sort of, I just want you to be normal, because if you're normal, your life will be easier. I think she just wants the best for him, essentially.
Yeah, and she's butting heads with the headmaster, who is a bit of a prick in this. So do you want to say something about the actor who plays the headmaster? Because he
absolutely, I'd love to. Yeah,
I mean, he definitely comes across. I mean, obviously, I'm sure he's a lovely guy, but in the story, he comes across as a very unlikable person. So so who plays the headmaster?
So the headmaster is played by Tom Hassel, who's a school friend of mine. In fact, I was in my first band with Tom when we were 13. We had a band called Youth Trap, and we wrote Youth Trap, yeah. And our logo was a fish; it was a piranha. And we did a couple of gigs in primary school and like high schools and stuff. But essentially, I wrote my first song actually with Tom. We wrote a song called Please Help Me, and it was in my garage, in my parents' garage, I should say. And I lived on an estate that was kind of full of silver-haired it was an older generation, this estate. And I remember sort of in the summer having the up and over door to the garage open, and we'd sort of write our songs and sort of present them to the estate. But yeah, it was a nice experience doing that, because to rekindle and sort of get back with Tom on this was really cool, because we haven't to be honest, I haven't seen Tom for many years. So when I reached out and said, would you still do some singing? Because he actually did performing in uni. So he's actually an educator now as well, which is funny, because
that's ironic. Yeah.
I hope he's not as terrible with his students as he is in this. But it was really cool to just touch base with Tom, and I just feel like he really pulled it out the bag. You've got this. You don't, when you listen to him, you are filled with fear. I think he's sort of tapped into that lovely. He's done a great job. Everyone,
all of the performers, really do a great job on this album. It's you're really convinced that they are the characters that they are, and they do a great job performing the music. And do you want to say something about "Take a Look"? Because I think that's a really great melody you came up with. So is it hard to come up with melodies? Because I mean that's one I think you could sort of hum along to and kind of sing along to. And it's hard to sort of, I would imagine it's a challenge to sort of when you're songwriting, that to actually come up with something that is very as unique as that is.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that first and foremost. Yeah, when you're doing when you're writing, sometimes a melody will come and it'll need a little bit of work. But for me, I'm quite lucky that when I sort of sit down to write a song, it kind of just presents itself, the melody, that I don't really have to work too hard at that. It's the lyrics that I have to work the hardest on. Usually I'll pretty much have the whole song written musically, with maybe like a little bit of a lyrical idea. But it's usually a sit down session after with a notepad. I'll play the like a scratch recording of the melody, instrumental in my headphones, and I'll just sit there with it on repeat, or I'll play it in the car as I'm driving, and then I'll just try and come up with lyrics on the top and develop it that way. But yeah, melodies, I'm quite lucky in that they come quite easy to me, which is great.
Okay, I would think that would be the hardest part, but because I guess I'm a little bit of a writer. I do some writing on the side, so I guess words come a little bit easier for me when I write. But I always thought that maybe the melody would be the hardest thing to come up with. But for you, it's the opposite.
Yeah, definitely.
But I do like the lyrics. One of the lyrics, and take a look, is the weak and defenseless, pinned down by the strong and the senseless. I mean, to me, that's a great line.
Oh, thanks. I remember doing that one and being chuffed with it. I was like, oh, that's definitely staying in.
It's very relevant to today. Like, you can apply that to stuff that's going on in the news over here in America. Obviously, I'm sure that there are scenarios in the UK where you can apply that to. It's a very relatable lyric. So, kudos for that. So let's go into the next track we're going to play, which is Deep Dive. I thought that this would be a good track to play to sort of, in this track, you kind of explain what a deep dive is, and it's as you mentioned before in the story, it's when the characters a character wants to go back to the past so badly, and they go deep into their mind, literally, and they're and through the magic of storytelling, they actually are where they want to be. And in this case, Bernie is he's from 2021, but he ends up in 1965. So this is after he's done the deep dive. He's sort of discovered by a girl and her father, Charlotte, and I don't think you ever say the father's name, but although we'll get to that later. But this is essentially, I guess, Charlotte and her father discovering Bernie in 1965. So let's play this track, and then we'll talk about it for a little bit. All right, so coming at you, it's Deep Dive from the Mundane Heights album on WMHC.
Is that a boy on the floor?
Yes, it's a boy on the floor.
Charlotte, check for a pulse. We have to check he's alive, 'cause every second of time is now precious. Mister, can you hear us?
On his breast there's a crest. Mundane school established 1881, but doesn't look like the uniform that I have on.
Mister, can you hear us?
I think he's coming round. Do you know your name? Do you know where you're from? Do you know the year? Do you know what's wrong?
My name is Bernie, from Mundane, it's 2021.
2021?
Oh no, the truth has occurred to me. 50 odd years, that's a record, it's got to be. You've done a deep dive, I've never seen a kid do a deep dive as deep as this. There must be something really wrong for you to fall from so long away. Never seen a kid do a deep dive this deep. What's happened to make life from so bleak? It's mostly those with a midlife crisis, trying to hold on to a time that's nice. A moment in life that you really want to go, that you love so deep when you really want to know how it felt to be under that spell, a pinch of relief when life is hell. The peculiar thing is the time he's in, 1965 that the pendulum swings to. Surely kids of the modern age don't need nostalgia or glory days. If anything, I'd say he's incomplete to dive so deep lying in this street. So dust him off, get him on his feet, we'll give him a room and some food to eat.
But how have you arrived?
So we're so far back in time.
That's the question on my mind. I've met deep divers multiple times, but never a kid before his prime. So how has life been so unkind to make him want to emigrate and wave goodbye?
We've never seen this one before.
It's a first for me, that's for sure. We've got to get him back through the record store, but first find out what on earth he's here for. The boy is lost, it's plain to see, but this is not his place to be.
So that was just Deep Dive, and that basically explains what's going on, and sort of the magic of the dream part of it, where Bernie is has been transported to 1965, and he's discovered by a girl and her father. So Charlotte and her father. Do you want to talk a little bit about the performers who take on those roles?
I'd love to. Yeah. So the Charlotte's played by a good friend of mine called Lisa Davis, who I've performed and played with now for probably like 12 years, 12, 13 years. Lovely, pure voice. You can hear every lyric, just really, really, really sweet, great voice. And just perfect for Charlotte. When I was sort of writing the songs, I kind of had Lisa's voice in my head as I was writing those bits. And then the father's played by Martin Peters, who's a good friend of mine, has played in a lot of bands with me, and I've played with him. In fact, recently he was featured as the BBC Wales A-list musician. So BBC Wales, the radio station here, had him on kind of repeat for like the week, with different radio show, different radio shows throughout the week on BBC Radio Wales. So he's done really well, and he's got his album is called Veins as well. So just a little shout out to Martin as well. But Martin actually played keys on the album as well. So he plays the parts of the dad, but he also played organ, piano, electric piano. So he's on it. He's on every track really. But it was quite a fun one, Deep Dive, because it's wordy, isn't it? There's a lot to fit in. And I don't think Martin had recorded something that fast before, so it was quite fun it was a challenge for him, which I think he excelled at. And in the middle, there's a bit of a nod to Martin Scorsese, Ennio Morricone. Just hearing those kind of westerny guitar lines, it was a little nod to that. Really, I love that music, so I just wanted to kind of shoehorn that into Deep Dive.
Yeah, I love that little guitar phrase at the end. Like you said, it's very Marconi inspired. I enjoyed it, and I guess it's the track where you kind of explain, the father's character, because he's encountered deep divers before, which we'll get to a bit later. He kind of knows what's going on. I'm guessing Charlotte maybe has never met a deep diver before this. So, and then obviously you also established that it's unusual that it's someone who from that far in the future, a kid who's wasn't alive in 1965. So I'm guessing the way it works is usually most people deep dive back to a place in their childhood or a place a time that they lived through that they were happiest. But in Bernie's case, it's unique because he obviously is his years before his time that he's actually deep dived to through his love of the music, because he loves the music from that era so much that he wants to experience it back when it was new.
Definitely. And his mind has enough sort of pieces of the puzzle to place him in 1965. It can kind of fill in the blanks, and it's as much as a shock to him as it is to everybody else that he's landed in 1965.
Yeah. So, all right. So the next thing we're going to do is Chris has a live performance of one of the tracks from the album called Kid About Town, which to me is one of my favorite tracks from the album. And it's one of those tracks that you can kind of listen to outside of the context of the story. And it still works. And it has that kind of like Beatlesque kind of melody. And it has a number of like really cool like harmonies and just fantastic musical stuff that I really appreciate. So do you want to talk about Kid About Town and, how you came about writing it for the story? It's just, one of my favorite songs on the album.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, the idea for Kid About Town was just, obviously it's a heavy story, isn't it? And the first sort of the first third of the album is sort of, Bernie having a hard time getting bullied. Now he's landed into 1965. The circumstances are all a bit mysterious. And I just felt the story needed a little bit of, a bit of light to it. So Kid About Town was just supposed to be a 60s jangly pop song, essentially. But it's nice that you've commented on the harmonies. They're actually Dullan. So Dullan Lloyd, who produced the album, he does the backing vocals on every single song. There isn't anybody else. It's just Dullan.
Oh, wow.
We initially went out to think, well, between myself and Dullan, we'll do the backing vocals together. But what was happening was you were hearing my voice and you could almost hear Bernie in songs that you shouldn't hear Bernie. So we kind of made the decision that it would be best if Dullan did it, and then they'd feel like they're sort of separate then, that, it's a whole different entity. So so the backing vocals, that's all Dullan, and I think he did a beautiful job. He's got a lovely, warm, creamy voice, so it worked well. And then with the guitar, that was something I wanted to do. I don't actually own a 12-string guitar, but in the 1960s, as I'm sure you know, like bands like the Byrds and the Beatles, George Harrison, sort of mid 60s, mid to late 60s, like the Laurel Canyon kind of sound was jangly, and it had that kind of sound to it. And I really wanted to do it, and I stumbled on a pedal that you can just plug your guitar into and click on. And it basically makes your guitar sound like it's a 12-string. So a lot of that I owe to Dullan. He's produced it and mixed it in such a way that, obviously there are some effects in there, but he's made it sound organic. And I do think that song sounds like it could have come out in the 60s. And I think we've kind of achieved what we wanted to with that. I feel proud of that one because, it could be looked upon as being a bit of a filler song. And maybe it is to an extent, but yeah, I'm really pleased with that one. I like the words. I like the imagery.
I mean, I sometimes, I listen to music during my commute on the bus, and I found myself when that track comes on, going, and of course, everyone around me on the bus thinks I'm crazy because I listen to it, through my earbuds and stuff. But yeah, no, it's a catchy tune. So, all right, so without further ado, let's get to Chris's live performance of Kid About Town.
Place for me, a welcome dip in history. A town that's been so bleak, filled with people that now speak. Instead of living through their phones and socializing on their own, I hear bands out playing songs to human beings. How I've longed to be in a town that feels 3D, a town that's meant for me. I'm feeling like I've never felt before. I'm the kid about town. Kept dreaming that I one day get the feeling of a kid about town. It's unconventional, yet feeling three-dimensional. Cut my ties with 21, 'cause 65 is where I long to be. It's plain to see. Pappers and the Stones are Brian Jones. Music's made of wax, you have to flip it on its back. And the Queen looks pretty young to be sat atop the monarchy. Fashion's born in Carnaby, Beatles all have MPEs. It's a time I've longed to see, a time that's meant for me. I'm feeling like I've never felt before. I'm the kid about town. Get the feeling of a kid about town. It's unconventional, yet feeling three-dimensional. Cut my ties with 21, 'cause 65 is where I long to be. It's plain to see. Now I can see my life getting better. my four suede Cuban heels are how I'll measure all my happiness. It's so good to be me. Yeah. I care about town.
So that was just Kid About Town. Fantastic song. Let's move on to the next track we're going to play, which is called Ballad of the Taxi Driver, which is sung by Charlotte's dad. Let's talk about that. I believe you have a story for this song, so why don't you tell it?
Yeah, so basically, I knew when we sort of had the majority of the album written, I kind of knew I wanted the dad to have a bit of a purpose rather than just be a dad, essentially, in the story. And I was scratching my head thinking, how can I sort of get him into the story? And Erin, my wife, said, why don't you make him a taxi driver? You meet a lot of people when you're a taxi driver, don't you? And you speak to people. So essentially, what Ballad of a Taxi Driver is, it's just explaining to the listener that Bernie's deep dive isn't unusual, and Charlotte's dad's seen it before over many years. And essentially, I kind of look at him as a bit of a sort of like a guiding light, really, for people that have deep dived. He picks them up and he says, right, you're here. Why are you here? And they might say, oh God, I've landed in 1950 because I must have landed here because I had a great time with my grandfather or whatever. And then it's up to Charlotte's dad then to ferry them to where they need to be to enjoy that kind of time. And essentially, he sort of says, he talks about the different people he's met that have deep dived, but he tells us of this lady that he sort of falls in love with called Michelle, which was sort of named after Michelle from the Rubber Soul album.
Michelle, my bell.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So he falls in love with Michelle. She's deep dived from wherever she's deep dived from. It could be she's living in the 90s or whatever, but she's deep dived, and she's a similar age to him. And basically, they fall in love, and it's a bit of a without Charlotte moment, really, where they're going to have to part ways. And there is a line in that I really love that says, "I wish we had the chance to wind the clock. Now we're just another lock on the mundane dock." And that came from, we went on holiday to Poland, myself and my wife, Erin, and there was a big bridge in Poland, and it had lots of locks on it that were sort of left by, these young couples or these older couples, whatever, that were all sort of clamped down, and the keys had been thrown into the sea. And it was like, how romantic is that? What a great image. So essentially, yeah, we actually did a graphic novel for this that a friend of mine called Betsy did all the art for, which is beautiful. And on the artwork, she's done a little lock on the bridge, and it says P loves M. So M we know is Michelle, and that sort of gives us the first little hint that there's an initial for Charlotte's dad. And sort of my little Easter egg is I see him as Paul, and it was named after Paul McCartney. So, and Paul wrote Michelle, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, I think it all works kind of well.
Yeah. So when I first heard that the song, that line kind of struck me, and I wasn't sure what it was in reference to. And then I did see the graphic novel version of the album, and then of course everything clicked. It is a really good line. Just another lock on the mundane dock. And it makes sense that couples would go, and that would be sort of like their touchdown. So almost like carving your initials onto a tree kind of thing.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
So it is a sort of a really cool sentiment, I think, and it sort of makes Charlotte's dad a more sympathetic character, because when you first meet them, he's sort of like the one saying, okay, well, you can't stay here, kind of thing, to Bernie.
Exactly.
And this is sort of like establishes him more as an understanding kind of character who, sympathizes more with Bernie rather than just be like, okay, you gotta go back home or whatever.
What I like about it as well is that in the song Rested, which is like earlier on, Charlotte's sort of telling Bernie about all the different geography and stuff within, in Mundane Heights.
Yeah.
And she says, we can look at all the locks that the lovers have left there for centuries. Yeah. And I quite like the fact that maybe when the dad that is telling Bernie and Charlotte about his time with Michelle, maybe Charlotte's learning for the first time that one of those locks is from her father. I think that's quite cool. And all sort of ties it back in, but it's just it's really hard because like you're trying to write songs that kind of tell a story, and you want it to work as an album as much as you do a graphic novel. So you're trying to make it very sort of visual so that people can picture it in their minds, but it is hard to do. And I think there's obviously areas that I could have improved, and there's certain songs that maybe I would have fleshed out a little bit more, and I've learned a lot from making this. But moments like that with the locks on the docks, I'm really pleased with, and I feel they come over well.
Yeah, I know we mentioned it before, but definitely check out, if you haven't seen it, the graphic novel version of Mundane Heights. You could find it on YouTube. If you just search for Mundane Heights, it should come up. All right, so let's get to the Ballad of a Taxi Driver.
Bernie, I'm going to blow your mind today. My dad's a taxi driver. He's never far away. We'll tell him we need a lift to the west side of the Heights, and then we'll sneak inside the nightclub when they down the lights.
All right, kids, hop in. I'll tell you a story while we go for a spin. You're not the first deep diver to sit in this car. I've had many lost souls that have come from afar, and every single one had a reason they dived, a subconscious longing, a feeling inside.
Guy in 55. He was lost, he took a dive. I asked him where he'd like to go. He said his heart would tell him so. We drove for miles in 55. I drove a girl in 56. She wanted taken to the sticks, a place she used to kick a ball, skim a stone and climb a wall with her dad in 56. When her girls around for slumbers, rolled up hair and doo-wop numbers. They kept saying how they want to be free and not tied living life like Sandra Dee. Stories people sharing taxis with me. I met Michelle in 63. She was 40, just like me. We talked for hours, sat by the sea. That is how it came to be. I loved Michelle in 63. Though I knew she could not stay here, didn't make it easier to say bye, dear. We had a chance to wind the clock. Now we're just another lock on the mundane dock. I miss her every single minute I breathe.
Yeah, I mean the tone you got on that guitar, just amazing, and just like it's just an incredible melody, Chris. I mean that's.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, and I, you know, that line, just another lock on the mundane dock, and the way the music kind of, you know, the way it's written, it's just incredible. It's another one of my favorite songs on the album.
Oh, thanks, Jack. Cheers.
So yeah, that was just the Ballad of a Taxi Driver, and it's almost set apart from the kind of like 60s inspired stuff that's on, you know, that you have. I think you've mentioned on one of your Instagram videos where it's like, okay, this is obviously Charlotte's dad singing it, so he's not going to be into like the psychedelic, you know, what was hip in 65. He would be more into, you know, sort of the sound of the 50s, and I think you really captured that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm pleased. I think a lot of that I owe again to Dolan, who produced it. You know, I had my Vox. You have like an amplifier, which is called like a Vox amplifier, is what we use, and they're sort of like rooted in the sort of 1950s, 60s bands like the Shadows and the Beatles used them. And it's one thing to own one, but when you know how to dial it in and make it sound good, I owe all of that to Dolan. I knew I wanted it to sound like it was in the 1950s, and he'd worked his wizardry on it and made it sound like it was. So yeah, I owe that one to Dolan.
Yeah, just a great song, Chris. All right, so moving on, let's go to another song which I'm really impressed with, which is Statue Song. You know, Bernie and Charlotte, this is after they go to the nightclub. They're kind of kicked out, and they're out and about in town, and they come across a statue, and you know, we have sort of here in America, there's a lot of controversy and news about you know, movements to sort of take down statues of not so good people, and you know, I think it's one thing, you know, and we're trying to sort of you know, it's hard because of two different factions. There's one faction that believes that they need to preserve things for history, but it's another faction that says, well, you know, just because something's historical doesn't mean you celebrate it.
Exactly.
You know, they're sort of like so they, you know, obviously, you know, there's a lot of division in our country when it comes to things like that, and you know, I mean, you do sort of have a way of sort of, you know, addressing that in the song, which I really appreciate. So let's listen to Statue Song, and we can talk about that for a little bit. All right, so here is a Statue Song from the Mundane Heights album.
Quick, Bernie, we need to run. Oh no, it's raining. Why does it always spoil the fun?
I don't feel the same. Some of the best songs have been written about the rain.
You really love music, don't you, Bernie? I think that's half the reason you're on this journey.
It doesn't matter what the subject, how big or how small. You can write a song about anything at all.
Well, if that's true, write a song about that statue, standing tall for all to see. I've never really stopped to think of how he came to be.
Only important people get made statues. It's always been the same throughout all history. You'll never see normal people get made statues. That's why you'll never see a statue made of kids like you and me. It seems a shame, but they're for the likes of John Mundane. John Mundane, do you feel the rain? Pitter-patter on your solid bronze brain. Do you feel no hurt, do you feel no pain? What did you do to warrant a statue? You must have been impressive to make the council fund it in the olden days.
I've seen statues made of people who are vicious, mean and evil. A statue doesn't make you good. Don't think because you're not a statue it says any less about you. 'Cause I love you.
What? I thought she said she she loved me then, but my years are getting older, they're over 10, so they're bound to miss here now and then. I'm debating if I should pretend not to hear her shocking revelation, but my elation is hard to keep and it's a strange sensation. I thought she said she loved me then, but my years are getting older, they're over 10, so they're bound to miss here now and then. I'm debating if I should pretend not to hear her shocking revelation, but my elation is hard to keep and it's a strange sensation. But it's a feeling full of meaning, someone peel me off the ceiling, I'm in love.
Night, Bernie.
Night, Charlotte.
All right, so that was just the statue song, which we talked a little bit about before we played it. Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I wanted a turning point within the story where Charlotte and Bernie kind of get a bit of a connection and they sort of fall for each other, just to make the payoff when they have to leave each other later, you know, feel hurt more essentially. So I knew I wanted something romantic and pretty, but then I was also aware of the fact, you know, they are like 11-year-old kids. Do you know what I mean? There is a bit of a limit. So I think the fact that they're just kind of connecting over this statue and they're having this little moment is sort of really sort of, you know, it's lovely. It's pretty. It's nothing more than that. It's very innocent. And musically, I wanted that, you know, I wanted the music to reflect that as well. And there's some of the songs off the White Album, particularly, you know, the fingerpicky stuff, things like Blackbird, Mother Nature's Son, all the kind of Paul McCartney contributions to the White Album. That was kind of what I wanted to achieve with Statue Song. So I knew I wanted it to sound, it's almost a bit Here Comes the Sunny as well, something a little bit, you know, something pretty. So yeah, that musically, that was where my head was with that one. It was actually one of the first, other than Without Charlotte, that this and Without Charlotte were the first duets I've ever written. So I've never written for two voices before. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I always enjoy when I hear that, when you have two singers and they're sort of harmonizing and singing, you know, sort of different lyrics, and it's sort of colliding together, and you hear them both separately and at the same time, and it has a really nice effect. You know, it's almost good. Like a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young effect. You know, that song "Teach the Children." They do a little bit of that in that song. So I always love when I hear that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I was really pleased with how it came out. I think the way that I was a bit nervous because there's a lot of words in those two sections. I was a bit nervous that maybe they would get lost, but I think Durlan and his wizardry has put, you know, one a little bit higher than the other. So when you listen to it on the album, it sounds right. I'm pleased with it.
Yeah, no, and then also this whole thing about statues, which we touched on before we played the song. You know, it can be a controversial subject, and I think you handled it well. Like, I was a bit concerned when I first listened to it for the first time. It's like, oh, okay, you know, I'm not sure where this is going, but actually that line where, you know, a statue doesn't make you good, I think really sort of you know, it very quickly sort of, you know, encapsulates, you know, or sort of captures a lot of what people feel about that. You know, and I think you mentioned that there was a specific statue that you had in mind.
There's a statue in my hometown, and there, I think basically there's again what we just said. Really, it's a statue of someone called H.M. Stanley, and he did a lot of good, but he also did a lot of bad. And basically, there's a call to tear down the statue, basically. And that's what was cool about it was when I went to Liverpool with Erin, we were looking at all statues of the Beatles and some of the icons in Liverpool, and obviously you're filled with inspiration, thinking, well, these are good people that have done good things. And it was days later that I saw the statue in my hometown that they were talking about taking down. I was thinking, wow, you know, you don't think about that, but statues can be made of people that perhaps aren't super duper good. So I think that was the idea for the song. And Bernie's you know, only important people get made statues, that's come from me, because I'd walk around Liverpool all the time, you know, as like a, you know, aspiring songwriter, thinking, you know, maybe pessimistically, but maybe thinking, oh God, I'll never have a statue of me for writing songs, you know. And I was kind of like, you can't help but be a little bit disappointed. You're like, oh, you know, being sort of cast in bronze for all of eternity for writing Statue Song would be great, but it's probably not going to happen. So that was the idea, really. It was just him saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to be made a statue?" And that Charlotte kind of making him feel better by saying, "Well, not all statues are great, so don't worry about it. Don't think because you're not a statue, I think any less about you. You're still great. So you don't need a statue to prove that to me." So that's the idea.
And the people who do get made, who are good, who get the statues made of them, that's not the reason why they did what they did. Like, obviously the Beatles weren't walking around wanting to, that kind of, it just sort of happened.
Yeah, exactly.
A great song. We're going to play just one more track from the Mundane Heights album. This has been a real pleasure, Chris. I love listening to this music, and it's good to sort of get your take on the album and the songs, and sort of hear it from hear your perspective of how you were inspired to write certain things, and where your mindset was as you were creating this. Before we play this last song, though, I think you wanted to just sort of talk a little bit more about certain contributors who unfortunately I'm not playing the whole album because we want everyone to sort of go and experience this and listen to the album in full, and go out, you can find it on iTunes and on Apple Music, Spotify, and I guess a number of other places where you can stream music, and it's also on YouTube. You could also find the graphic novel version of it on YouTube. And then also you should follow Chris on social media. On Instagram, there's a Mundane Heights Instagram page and a Mundane Heights Facebook page. So search for Mundane Heights, you'll find that. And also Chris also has another page where he does other music too. But you've also have you were very lucky to have some great contributors who we haven't mentioned. So let's talk about them, because I know there was a school teacher, I think, at the beginning, and then also there's a fellow who plays the record store owner in the story. Basically, the way that the time travel kind of works is once someone is ready to get out of their deep dive, they go to a record store and they have a rare release that they listen to, and that brings them back to their present time. So let's first talk about the school teacher, and then she also plays a different character, the lounge singer who at the nightclub, who actually she plays a couple of characters. So let's talk about her first.
Yeah, so those parts were played by Betsam Williams, who is actually Dullan, the producer's mum. So that was a lucky thing on my part. Basically, we hadn't cast the parts yet, and Dullan said, "Oh, my mum would do it." It was really that simple, and I was just blown away at the performance, especially on the Mundane Nights, which is the one in the nightclub. I know you're familiar with the Floyd, but there's a song by Pink Floyd called "Great Gig in the Sky," which is sort of like an improvised, amazing vocal take. And I think there's a little bit in Mundane Nights that kind of certainly reminds me of that. And that's all down to Betsam. Just an absolutely stunning performance from Betsam.
Yeah, my mother sings, but you wouldn't want her on your album. I kind of cover my ears when my mom sings. So you're lucky you have friends who actually their moms have great voices. My mom.
Well, hopefully your mum won't hear this podcast. Yeah.
All right, and then you have the fellow who plays the record store owner. If you want to give him a shout, and
I'd love to. Yeah. So there's not long after Statue Song, actually, so it's the perfect place to talk about that. There's a song called "What Are You Doing?" And that's essentially where Bernie thinks, right, I'm gonna, I'm staying here now. I'm happy in 1965, and I don't want to go home. And as you touched upon earlier, the sort of portal back home is a rare release. So you listen to this special LP, and it sends you home. But for Bernie to get the LP, he has to go to the record store and get the record, but the record store owner is reluctant to give it him because he can kind of see in Bernie's eyes that maybe his intentions aren't great. And the record store owner is played by Neil Smith, who is actually a cousin of Lisa, the Charlotte character, which was really cool. I hadn't actually met Neil when we recorded the album. I actually met him at the release of the album, which is pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I just absolutely love his performance. It's dark. It brings you, because Statue Song and all of the songs that have been running up to Statue Song have been quite upbeat and innocent. I think Neil's performance brings you back down to earth and realize, you kind of realize that the story's got a dark side to it. And I don't think we could have achieved it like we did without Neil's performance. So yeah, I love his vocal on that. It's short. It's, I don't know, probably about a minute of performance, but I think what he does in that minute is really, amazing, really.
Yeah, everyone who performs on this is just incredible. So kudos to everyone who contributed. Yeah. And like I've said, the songwriting is great. It's, you want to go and listen to this, and it gives you that feeling of like, back when I was younger, I would buy a bunch of CDs sometimes, and I would go home and just put headphones on and have like the liner notes and read the lyrics and like listen to each album all the way through and sort of like, reflect on every, on the music and sort of like, the music sort of transports you and stuff when when you first get, especially when you're listening to an album that you go on to love for the first time. You have that feeling, and this album does that for me. So it's an incredible achievement, Chris.
Thanks, Jack. The last shout out I wanted to give as well was to Josh Owen, who played bass on the album. So he's the last of the contributors. So yeah, thanks so much, Josh, for all your hard work on the album.
All right. So, so the last track we're going to play is Mundane Song, which is a kind of, it's the track that ends the album. And it's it's a very uplifting track. I think I've told you before, it reminds me a little bit of Hey Jude, but it also has a little bit of a tribute to the Beatles at the end. But we'll talk about that when we come back. So you're listening to the Mundane Heights channel, WMHC. And this is Mundane Song coming at you.
It won't take long to change your mundane song and see how life could be. If you think my world is better than your world, try finding something to believe in. If you try to see it, your world said that hope had gone. Life's only what you go and make of it. It isn't long, so change your mundane song. Try finding something to believe in. If you try to see it, your world could be a little bit brighter. When the world
right. That was Mundane Song by Chris Wood and the cast of Mundane Heights. Wow. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I love this song. It's very uplifting. Kind of, it puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. And I love how at the end you have that like guitar trade off that you kind of get from the end of the Abbey Road, the Golden Slumbers medley with the end song. So the kudos. I think almost everyone who's a Beatles fan will recognize that. It's just it definitely it definitely puts a smile on my face, Chris, when I hear that.
Oh, thanks, Jack. Cheers. Thank you.
So do you want to say anything about a Mundane Song before we go, like how that song came about, how the inspiration for at what point in the creative process did you come up with it, when you were creating the album?
It was later on in the process. I'm really glad that he picked up on the Abbey Road thing with the end, because funnily enough, Jim Williams, who mastered it, he was the first person when he listened to it, he said, it sounds, you've definitely been inspired by the end. And I remember sort of like fist bumping the sky, like, yes, like finally, like somebody's heard the end. Because like, you set out sometimes with these inspiration, you hope it kind of comes across. But for Jim to kind of click and say, oh, that sounds like the end, that was a box ticked for me. But no, it was a fun song to do, and Lisa's performance is beautiful. But the kind of the fun bit of that song is the guitar solos, and we actually recorded it. It was the last bit of music to be recorded, and it was basically Dullan, who's produced the album. He was starting university, so we had like a really, really short amount of time to finish the album, and we had one session left, and we worked till I think about midnight. And I remember saying to Dullan, the whole album's been so thought out. Every track has been, thought before we've gone into the studio. It's all been written down. The lyrics are there. The structure's there. It would be nice just to have a small segment that just isn't, and that is improvised. So we purposely left loads of bars at the end of that song free. We strapped on a guitar each, sat opposite each other, and then, as you said, we just traded off with the guitar solos and just didn't think too much about it. The whole point is the album has been so dark, and there's been bleak moments, and there's been a bit of an arc. So we wanted to end on a happy note. The message in Mundane Song is essentially, whatever you're going through at this time, you can make it better. It can change. Don't worry about it. So it made sense for the music at the end to have that same attitude and just to be free and easy. And I'm really pleased with how those guitar solos came out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like it's almost like a combination of Hey Jude and the end, mash those songs together, you come up with Mundane Song. That's just great stuff, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
So thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I've had a lot of fun playing DJ for a day, and anytime you want me to come and take over your channel, I'm happy to do it. If you want me to interview,
I'd love you to do it again.
If you want me to interview one of the any of the other contributors, and we can talk with them and we can get their perspective on how they came to do their parts and stuff. That would be great. If you, for those of you listening or watching, go check out Mundane Heights, go find it. Like I said, you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, all those places. And also on YouTube, you can also find the graphic novel version of the album, and you see the album visually along with the music, which is really fantastic. It'll fill in a lot of blanks. You definitely have to go on this journey. If you haven't done so already, go check out Mundane Heights. So I've been Jack Lugo, and it's been a pleasure hosting this program. And then I got to thank my guest, Chris Wood, who is the man behind Mundane Heights. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Jack.
All right. So there we go.